Got to face it, it's an impossible business until it's not impossible anymore, right? You just got to keep chipping away at the impossibility every day a little bit until it's possible.
This is the Act One podcast. I'm your host, James Duke. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy our podcast, please do us a favor and help us spread the word and share it with others who you think might also enjoy it. And be sure to subscribe and leave us a good review as well. Today, I am bringing you a very special episode of the Act One podcast. On this episode, I'm going to play for you our Act One TV Showrunner Roundtable that we hosted on Zoom back in February of this year. Joining me in the discussion are 4 seasoned veterans of the television business who are all either currently showrunning or have been a showrunner in the past. Our panelists include Monica Macer, who served as showrunner on Queen Sugar and most recently on CBS's MACGYVER. Also with us is Brian Bird, the co-creator and executive producer and former showrunner of the hit Hallmark show When Calls the Heart. Sheryl J. Anderson is the showrunner and executive producer of the hit Netflix show Sweet Magnolias. And also joining us is Saladin K. Patterson, who served as showrunner on The Last OG with Tracy Morgan, as well as the upcoming Wonder Years reboot on ABC. Back in February, we had a wonderful, wide-ranging conversation, and I'm excited to be able to share our discussion to our podcast audience today. I hope you enjoy. The purpose of this evening is I wanted to accomplish is one, just wanted to sit down with 4 really wonderful people and have a conversation about the business of television, right? And what does it look like from your perspective? Because every single one of you have held different positions in this industry. I think Saladin's the only one who's a MIT grad, so he officially is the smartest one in the room. Maybe not. Maybe we have a few. Maybe we have some Caltech people or something. But
I hope
not. But I want to start off with the conversation, just talking to you guys about where you started. Can you think back to one of your best or worst days when you started out in this business, and what kept you going, right? On that day when maybe you got yelled at, or maybe you just really screwed up, or I don't know what it was, but what was it like? I'll start with you, Sheryl, and what was it like for you in the beginning? And when did you feel like, I don't know what it's going to take, but I'm going to do whatever it takes to kind of keep going in this career?
Well, I came to the West Coast with that notion that I'm going to do whatever it takes, because I did not want to leave the East Coast. I didn't want to leave my family and my friends, but this seemed to be the place that I had to be to do what I wanted to do. And my parents were incredible about it. They said, you need to do this, particularly if you feel called to do this. I think my dad was grateful that I decided to come out here because I stopped asking to go to seminary. But I gave myself 5 years, and good stuff happened before the 5 years ran out. But I can probably dice up all the time I've been here into 5-year chunks and think, well, if this had been the first 5 years, I wouldn't still be here. Yeah. I used to have what I called law school moments, which were sitting on the kitchen floor at 3:00 in the morning, sobbing and wondering if it was too late to go to law school. But the conversation that came to mind when you asked the question wasn't that long ago. But I'd had a series of disappointing near successes rather than near misses. And my father, who was a naval officer, so had a very ordered view of the world and was a highly decorated man. I mean, my idol. He said to me, "I don't know how you do what you do," which shook me. But I said, I'm trying to live the life you raised me to live. And so if God wants me to do something different, he's got to speak up, because I keep asking him if I should leave, and he hasn't told me to yet. Mm. And so at every crossroad, I say, so is this it? And he hasn't told me to leave town yet.
Wow. Saladin, for you, did you, because your story is, you didn't start out, right, as a writer. Is that right?
Right. My undergraduate degree, as you mentioned earlier, was in electrical engineering at MIT, and then I went to grad school for psychology, which when I'm in pitch meetings, I use that to say that, I can do a lot of things, but the reality was I couldn't do anything really, really well. And so it was trying different things. It kind of came, I fell, by the grace of God, I fell into writing when I was in grad school, not knowing much about it, not having known much about it growing up in Alabama in terms of it being a viable profession. I kind of fell in love with the idea of it in grad school, and that's kind of when I started my path out here.
When was the first time, Monica, for you? When was the first time for you where you thought to yourself, I don't think I can do this, but I'm not gonna stop? Or maybe you never had that thought.
No, I did. I think it wasn't at the beginning trying to break in, because I started in theater, working and was sort of like an up and coming theater director, and had a mentor who was like, you should think about TV and film, and was, writing plays. And then I came out here, and I had so much support from my family, from my mom and my dad, and an alumni group that helped me get, my first job as an assistant on the Paramount lot. So I think at the beginning of my career, I was really tenacious, had a lot of support, had a lot of really solid friends from church we were constantly praying. So I think I felt like this is gonna happen for sure. It really wasn't until I was like a mid-level, lower level writer on a particular show with a really hard boss that was bullying me and the two other female writers. And I didn't really see it that way. I was just like, gosh, why won't he approve my outline? And I've told this story before, but like, he made me rewrite my outline 14 times. And then I met a woman, and it wasn't rewrite the same story. It was like, this is a story about a North Korean agent, trying to defect to, no, now we want you to write a story about an Olympic swimmer from Paraguay. He would just change the entire story. And then I went to a mixer and with friends, and they introduced me to a woman, and they said, oh, you two should meet. And we started talking, and she said, what show are you on? And I told her the show, and she looked at me and she said, how many times have you rewritten your outline? And I was like, how do you know that? And she was like, I worked for him last season. You're a mid-level woman. He's trying to break you. Wow. And so up until that point, I was really depressed kind of, and would drive the long drive to work, like on the verge of tears every day, just knowing he was going to take his red pen and rip my outline apart. But as soon as she told me that, I was like, oh, okay, you're trying to break me? Game on. So, but that was like the first time where it was really, and she said, this is what he does to the lower and mid-level women. He wants to see you cry. And he'd already made the staff writer team cry. And I was like, well, you ain't never going to see me cry. Like, once I knew that was the game, I was like, oh, okay, this is the game. I'll just rewrite my outline every time you tell me to with a smile now. So that was, wasn't at the beginning. It was sort of at the.
Wow. Saladin, before I go to you, Brian, when you decided to shift into writing, I don't think I got that. When you decided to shift into writing, was there a moment for you that you decided, I have made a terrible mistake?
Yeah, certainly. And, of course, when you ask the question, I started going through my memories, and there's some doors in my memory that may still be locked. I'm not ready to revisit yet, but a couple of them did open. So I came out, like I said, when I came out here from grad school, I came out here to be a part of the Disney Writing Fellowship Program. That's what brought me out here to LA. And so I was, you were brought out here with other people in various stages of trying to break in. We were all relatively new at that point in time to be in the program. You couldn't have had any produced work. So we were all, amateurs. And the program tried to model the best way it could what the experience would be like as a working writer. We had to pitch our ideas to executives, get them approved, and we had to do outlines on those ideas and then do drafts and get notes and things like that. And I remember, again, I was riding high on the fact that I had taken this step of faith, leaving grad school, leaving the comfort and safety zone there and coming out here. And, I've been blessed to get the fellowship. And so, it was one of those things where I was like, okay, clearly, all right, God, this has all been you. So, the waters are going to be parted every step I take. And in the program, my first script, I remember getting notes from my executive on the first draft was well received, and they gave me notes, and then I just kept getting more notes and kept getting more notes. And I remember my executive getting very frustrated with me, and I didn't know why. And so the person under her, took me out, I think, to Arts Deli back in the Valley when it had right next to the bowling alley. I think I remember that. And I remember her, her telling me, such and such is very upset and frustrated, and I remember thinking, well, I'm frustrated because she keeps giving me notes. I mean, what's she frustrated about? But it was one of those things where she helped me understand that I was still approaching writing like a student, because I'd only been a student up until that point, in that my approach was, tell me what it is that needs to be fixed. Okay. Tell me what it is that you want me to do, and I'll do it. And they were frustrated because they wanted me to start thinking like a professional writer, where it's like, well, I have a voice and I have a point of view and I have something I'm trying to say, and they can point out when it's not working, but I need to be the one to figure out what it is I'm trying to say. And I need to be the one to figure out what the solution is to whatever the source of the notes was. And that was, it was very scary for me, because that was me being pushed out of a comfort zone that had carried me up until that point of being a good student and being the kind of person, if you tell me what it is I'm supposed to go and research and study, I will find the answer from that and bring that back to you. And they were trying to get me to actually become a writer and say, no, what's inside you that needs to be said that's going to address this? And I hadn't exercised that muscle before. I hadn't had to be a writer like that before. And it was something I didn't know whether or not I could do that.
Wow.
I knew how to be a good student. I knew how to find answers, and God was telling me, well, it's time for you to grow. And like I said, I did not know that I was going to be able to answer those questions. It sounds very simple, but it was very scary. And I have found that was the first of countless times, in my professional career where I've been faced with something where I had to say, I don't know whether or not I'm going to be able to figure that out. But thankfully, the fact that it has happened before gives me the confidence now to know that I can. And to be honest, though, what I've had to learn personally is that living in that space of, I don't know if this is my last script or not. I may have used up every joke I had. I don't know if I have another joke. Like, living in that space is kind of what writing is, and that's kind of what I had to discover, being comfortable being in that space where it's like, dang, they're right, this doesn't work. And I don't really have a fix for it now, but I have to have one by the time we have a run through tomorrow. So, it'll happen. So I just have learned to be comfortable in that as opposed to letting it terrify me.
Oh, that's good. Brian, I'll come to you. Is there a time that in your illustrious career, Brian Bird, when you thought, I'm going to pack my bags and go home? This is awful.
Yeah, there is actually. There have been many of them, actually. It's sort of hard to pick one. I've because this is, got to face it. It's an impossible business until it's not impossible anymore.
Yeah.
Right. You just got to keep chipping away at the impossibility every day a little bit until it's possible. And all the projects seem that way to me. Right. When you're first starting. But this will date me a little bit for all my younger cohort of panelists here. But my first produced show was way back in the 1980s with a show called Fantasy Island. And there's not too many of these younger people who even know what I'm talking about right now. But so I'm 25 years old, and I was a journalist, actually. That's how I started out, as a journalist first, went to journalism school. And so I was a working writer, but as a journalist for several years before the opportunity opened up for me to, get into the TV business, TV and film. And 1985, I had my first cup of coffee in the big leagues. I had an episode of Fantasy Island that was produced. It was the last season that the show was on, so I just sort of snuck in under the deadline there. And then it was so bloody fantastic and so much fun, going from journalism to actually playing God and to be able to create my own world, or at least a version of the world that other people had created many years earlier. And then the opportunity dried up because the show got canceled. They had said, if we get picked up for a 9th season, we want to bring you on as a story editor next year. And I thought, I've landed this plane, right? I got a career now. And I made in one episode almost as much money for about 3 weeks worth of work as I made all year as a journalist. So it was like, I got to do more of this. This is awesome. And then I found myself without a hookup at that point. And I went back to my day job, my journalism job. And 3 years later, I'm in Ethiopia on a magazine assignment as a journalist. And I'm in the Hilton hotel room in Addis Ababa, flipping through Ethiopian television at that point. This is 1988. And guess what I see on TV in Ethiopia? Fantasy Island, but not just Fantasy Island, my episode.
Wow.
Fantasy Island with Amharic subtitles. And it was a real crystal moment for me, because in the three years or so, between then and when I got into the big leagues, I got a little perspective on the whole thing. One episode of Fantasy Island way back then, really, who cares? I mean, it's like a dust mite in the cosmos. And I got some perspective, but it was a crystal moment for me, because as a believer, I just said, God, if something that trivial can be broadcast all over the world like this, then the converse of something trivial is true. The opportunity for much better, bigger, bolder faith stories, life-affirming stories, whatever, that's also possible. And I got on my hands and knees and I said, God, if you want me back in that game, open another door for me. And a year later, I landed my first staff job on a CBS show, a comedy, no less, as a journalist, go figure. But I got on a comedy, a half-hour comedy called The Family Man. And I had landed my first staff opportunity, and I've worked ever since, in the business since that was 1989-90 season. Wow. And so, for me, it was not so much a sense of why did I make a mistake and get into this business, and how did I trick myself into getting here? It was more of a sense of hunger at having had a cup of coffee and then being shut out for a few years, and then saying, you know what, we need to do more. Believers need to have a seat at the table in this business. The conversation's going to continue with or without us, so we better be part of the conversation. And so that was my plea to God is, I'm supposed to do this. If I'm supposed to do this, put me back in.
Did you get to write the actual words, deplane?
You know what? I wish, but in the 8th season of the show, tattoo had been jettisoned from the show.
No! no.
Yeah. He was not in the 8th season. There was a British butler who became.
Oh, I remember that. It was Mr. Belvedere.
Yeah, Christopher Hewitt. Yeah. And so I didn't get a chance to write the plane.
Hervé was probably holding out for more money or something. I don't know.
I think that's what it was. Yeah.
I want to ask about, and this is for any of you guys who want to speak to this, but when was the first time you heard of a concept of a showrunner? And was that ever like an aspiration? Was that something that was an actual thing? Or, did you even, because, we never talked about, people didn't know what showrunners were years ago. When was the first time you even knew that could be a job and it's something that maybe you wanted to do?
I watched Dick Van Dyke reruns when I got home from school in the afternoon.
Yes,
So that was my concept of how a show was run.
Yes, that's awesome. And that's how you run your show today, isn't it, Sheryl?
I trip just about as often.
That's awesome.
I think I first heard of it probably when I was in the Disney program, and they kind of oriented us to, how staffing works and how to be on the show works. But, I'll point out, so in the mid 90s when I first started, yes, when we wanted to be a showrunner, this was the time, and it's very unfortunate that Jamie Tarsis just passed away, but this is when Jamie had landed her network president position at 29, and Paul Sims was running news radio at 29, and Bentley Evans had created Martin at like 28, 29, and Vetley Bowser was doing living single. And I keep saying 29 because there was this thing of being a showrunner before you turn 30. That was like this, it was like this goal. I wouldn't say goal. It was like this thing that was being held up as like, oh my goodness, these wonderkins that are coming out, and creating shows and running shows. And of course, I was like, I'll do that. No, I made a point. I was going to be a showrunner before I turned 30. Then I was going to be a showrunner before I turned 35. And there's going to be a showrunner before I turn 40.
Just keep moving the goalpost. Keep moving the
goalpost. But so I certainly became aware of it and had this artificial, goal that I was like, I don't know if I went as far as saying, I feel the Lord's call and saying I was going to be a showrunner. I certainly don't think that was the case. Although I'm sure I tried to, I'm sure I was asking, why, Lord, why not me? But it helped me learn the reality of, I didn't have anything to say for a very long time, really. I needed some life experience before, and some failures and some learning about people and things like that. Sure, it could have happened. Before 30, but I'm sure that may have been the last time it happened too. So it was a classic example of I thank God that he knew better than me what was like really gonna help me be a part of his plan versus me just being able to be in variety, saying I was a showrunner before 30.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the first time I heard the term was when I was an assistant in Hollywood. Before that, I knew there were TV writers. I just didn't know what the word showrunner meant. And even then, when I started, I was on the feature side, and features was still king at that point. And so it was kind of like I kind of thought I was just going to be a feature writer and write my screenplays in my apartment at night. And it wasn't until looking at the different training opportunities that TV actually had more entry points, more program, the ABC program, the Warner Brothers program, the Fox program. There are all of these training programs, and I didn't really see that on the feature side. And I also, coming from theater, I liked the communal, aspect of being in a writer's room and not just being by yourself, trying to figure out your story. So that was really the first time that I heard what a showrunner was.
Mm.
I think for me, when I did that Fantasy Island, I never saw the showrunner. I was working with a supervising producer and a producer to get that show in place. That from a pitch to an outline to a script. The showrunner was behind a closed door, and I never even met him. Mm-hmm. But when I landed on my first TV series, Ross Brown was running The Family Man. for Bob Boyette and Tom Miller. Actually, it was a part of that sort of that whole TGIF juggernaut franchise company. And being in the writer's room as a story editor that first year, wow, what an education that was, because it's what you learn is, it's not a big mystery how somebody gets to be a showrunner. You just have to be like a general, essentially, in the Army. And you can earn the right to get there just by being in the business if you stick around long enough. Because essentially you get a new rank every year the longer you stay in a show, or even if you go from one show to another, your last position becomes the benchmark of your next position. And so you sort of go up the food chain until you get to the log jam at the top of the table. And sometimes you can go from, up the ranks to become a showrunner, but most of the time you have to jump ship, go to another show, or create your own show to get that opportunity. And but it's really like being in the military in a weird way. You get a little more experience every year. You get a little more opportunity. You do more things the higher, you go from story editor to, executive story to co-producer to producer, to supervising producer to co-exec, then to executive producer. And you see a lot of executive producer names on TV shows. I think we have 14 of them now on When Calls the Heart. That's because there's a bunch of people there that have gone through the ranks and they have earned the right to be at the table. Doesn't mean they're the showrunner. So usually it's, what you learn is that you have to, yes, you can become a showrunner on somebody else's idea or somebody else's show, but most of the time you have to create your own opportunity for that by creating a new show, a pilot. You go in and pitch a new show and you get a seat at the table that way.
A lot of you guys have talked about, you've made mention to, Saladin, you said, you needed to learn a little bit, grow a little bit, live life a little bit. Let's talk a little bit nuts and bolts as writers. How important is POV? How important is it for you as a writer to develop your own POV? Because what I do hear is that that's important, but at the same time, when you're, say, on a writing staff for a TV show, you're technically writing someone else's show. So how do you develop your own kind of distinct voice and your own distinct kind of POV that will carry you through as an artist, so that maybe eventually, to Brian's point, you can create your own show, versus that day-to-day being in the room trying to make sure that you're successful at writing someone else's voice, that showrunner's voice?
Well, I don't think it's an either or. I think you have to do both. As you're developing your point of view and your voice, you're also learning how to use your POV and your voice in the service of someone else's. And it's that balancing act that makes you successful in TV. That the hope would be that the showrunner recognized your strengths. I mean, I know when I staffed my show, I was looking for people with different outlooks, different experiences, different backgrounds, because if everybody's like me, that's not very interesting. But if everybody's different, but we're all looking at, all right, we want to tell a story of redemption, we want to tell a story of community with these characters who have these voices, then everybody's various experiences, the shadings and the nuances of all the different voices combine to give our characters nuanced, textured, multi-leveled voices, make the world that much more interesting. And I think the show benefits hugely from that.
I remember I remember the moment when I realized I did not have a point of view. It was another one of those tough learning lessons. I was working for Larry Wilmore on the show The PJs, and I remember I was taking one of my many trips to the kitchen during the day, which is another thing I was tell people not to do. Another lesson I had to learn, that the youngest writer shouldn't be the one leaving the room the most. But I remember bumping into Larry in the kitchen and him pulling me aside and saying, "Hey, look, man, we all know you're funny, okay? Stop trying to show us how funny you are. We don't necessarily need you to, to hear what the funniest joke that could also be in The Simpsons or could also be in another show. He's like, you're the only writer here from Montgomery, Alabama. I want to hear the point of view that your grandfather would have had about something in the script, And it was another one of those moments where I was like, oh crap, I got to figure out how to do that. But it made me start to think, to answer your question about how do you develop your own point of view, but also channeling the point of view of a showrunner, characters, whatever, whenever we were at a moment when we needed a character to do something or say something, to be motivated, I literally approached it analytically and said, okay, what would I do in that moment? Okay. And then, is the character like me or not like me? If the character is opposite of me, then let them say the opposite thing that I would say, But it always started with me first saying, what would I do? What would I say about that? And what would I feel about that? And just me being able to answer that question helped me then, okay, well, then this character is similar to me or not similar to me, and helped me then put myself in the character's point of view as well. So I would, like Sheryl was saying, it was something that I was able to develop kind of, simultaneously.
Okay, I also think it's a little bit easier than probably when we all entered the business, where I know when I entered, all I had to do was spec another show. So my own original voice, no one really was interested. Can you mimic the showrunner's voice? And you did that by writing a spec of a show. And I remember when I was around exec story editor level, it was like, you have to write something original. And I was like, what? And it made me realize oh, how easy. It's not easy. It was still hard to write a spec, to find the right show to spec and come up with the right episode. But now people only want to read original material. So you really do have to have your own voice, because that's what's going to get you noticed. I also think the bar is a lot higher, because to be an entry-level writer, to be coming in at staff writer and have to come up with a concept that is winning enough to feel like a pilot, to execute it in a way that is going to have an executive read all the way through, to have your own voice shine and also be competitive in today's market in a stack of other scripts. I do think it's a lot harder to write an original spec pilot than it is to write a spec of a show, because a really good original spec pilot is a good show. And that was the other thing I learned, is I can't just write a good spec pilot. I had to figure out what the whole show is so I can back it into this pilot so that it's convincing enough that someone will want to hire me. So I think it's a blessing and a curse. It's great because, hey, it's all about your original voice now. You do have to have your own POV, and yet know how to, what I figured out my staff writer year was my job is to facilitate the showrunner's thought process. Once I stopped being my idea, mine, which was hard because it was lost. And I was hired. Part of the reason that they were was because I was half African-American and half Korean-American. And the room would stop when I started talking about Sun and Jin, because nobody had been to Korea and nobody's mom was Korean. And so there was I had a little realm of authority. And it was interesting, not so much with Michael, Walt, and Rose, even though they were African-American. But I got that job off of a spec, not my own original pilot. That shifted. So I do think it's not easier. It's great because writers, you get to serve that up on a platter to people. Whereas when most of us started, that wasn't the case. We just had to write a spec of a show.
By the way, Monica, before I forget, what was the island? Can you just tell us? What was the island? For the love of God, someone tell us. You were in the room, Monica. What was the island?
Purgatory.
So I was just there the first season, and I remember it was driving JJ crazy because he was getting ready to go off and shoot Mission Impossible with and leave. And he wanted us to figure out what the island was. And so he came in one day and he said, I'm not leaving this room until we figure out what the island is. And so we sat there with him and figured out, what the island is it's a spaceship. It's aliens came to Earth to study humans, and over time the land and everything grew over the spaceship. And at the end of the series, he wanted the spaceship to like rumble and shake and everything fall off and then fly away. And I was only there for the first season, and then he left the room, and Damon was like, we're probably never going to do that, but now we at least have a solve. We had to sit there for 4 hours and solve for X. And we did, and he was really happy with that idea, and then went off to go direct Mission Impossible. And then I remember years later, I was no longer on Lost, sitting in the theater for one of the Indiana Jones movies, and that was the end. And I was like, they're never going to do it now.
That's I never heard that story. That's very cool. That's Brian. Awesome. Brian, I'm curious for you, because you and I think three of the four, right? Monica, I don't think you've written for both comedies and hour long, but everyone else.
GENTEFIED is
dramedy. Okay.
Yeah. Dramedy.
But Brian, you did a half hour and you've done an hour. Yep. To me, that trying to find, your point of view, going back and forth between those types of shows had to be a little bit of challenge.
Yeah, for me, it was always about because I started as a journalist, so I was comfortable in my writing skin, from the get-go. But in my view, good writers should be able to do anything. Now you have to kind of prove that you can do that, right? You got to prove yourself in those different arenas. That was always my goal, to be able to show people that, you give me the assignment and I'll figure it out, right? And sort of had that tenacity to figure things out. And so you look at my IMDb page and it's like I'm schizophrenic, and I know that. I don't really care. I've worked for 35 years. So you do, and you nail whatever people put in front of you, and you try to do that. In terms of specs versus originals and so forth, and having a writer's voice, it's absolutely true. And I think nowadays it's a lot easier, as Monica said, to hear somebody's voice when you're reading their original spec pilots. Mm-hmm. Again, they're hard to nail. They're hard to get to do well with. But I think there's also a balancing act going on, because if you're writing as a staff writer on somebody else's show, somebody else is setting that voice of the show. And honestly, the showrunner is maintaining the voice of the show. And so I think good writers have to be able to be syncretists. And what I mean by that, it's like you have to be a good undercover cop. And what you have to do is you have to empty yourself out sometimes and fill yourself up with somebody else's vision in order to get them to where they need to go. But you also have to balance that with, not wanting to just be somebody's clone and, feed back to them what they want to hear. You got to be able to challenge the process enough to have your own voice. So I think there's a balancing act in that. What I tell young writers these days is have both. Have a good spec of somebody else's show, but pick something that's going to last a while, because if you write a spec show nowadays and it's gone in 2 seasons or even one season, it's, you're starting from scratch again pretty soon. So I always say, write your own original spec pilot so we can hear your voice, but then also show us that you know how to get into somebody else's voice too. And I think good writing is about being able to do both. And when I'm reading somebody for a show that I'm staffing up, I do want to see both. I want to see that they know how to get into somebody else's world and nail it. But I also want to hear something original from them too.
All right, so that's my next question for you guys. Every single one of you guys, staff shows, you hire. What are you looking for? What do you look for when hiring a new staff writer? Because obviously there's going to be people on this in the audience. They want to get staffed. What do they need? You've talked about the spec, like not only the tangible physical things that they need, but what are the other intangible things that you're looking for that writer in the room?
I'll start because I actually inherited a staff on MACGYVER. And so there was the challenge of, how do I learn what people's strengths and weaknesses are, build rapport over Zoom, and manage these personalities that I don't know, and people who already have, the majority of the staff had worked together before. And I'll just say the qualities that I love in our staff writer, Josh, who was bumped up from script coordinator from the last couple of seasons to staff writer. And I love that Josh will always come into the room with pitches, very respectful of the other writers. I mean, there is a hierarchy in the room. And while I want everyone to feel, comfortable and we're all there to participate and build the episode together, just like Brian was saying, we are the Army. And so title determines rank. And so he's very respectful, always has a lot of pitches on the get. MACGYVER is a show that is, we do have a fellow MIT alum as well, Teresa Huang, on our staff. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of GAC and there's a lot of these Mac moments and there's science, but it's how do you make that relatable and fun for an 8 o'clock audience? Kids are watching this with their parents. So Josh is, if you don't like his pitch, he is not crushed. He's just like, okay, checking that off the list. Like he does the homework. He has a great attitude and he's hungry. And if there has to be a rewrite, on something, even before I think to the end of the day, I need to sit down and talk to him about, he's already, he's like, oh, wait, let me pull up. I have my rewrite strategy based on the notes. So he's always anticipating the needs of the show and he's hungry in a way that is not desperate or anxious, but just very positive. And you need that positive energy in a room and also just in general, especially when you're producing a show in the middle of a pandemic. So I love his attitude. I love his work ethic. I love his, his creativity and thinking outside of the box. Those are things that I feel really, I'm so grateful that he is a staff writer, because at first I was like, when Peter said he was going to bump him up, I was kind of like, oh, I really wanted to hire a staff writer. Cause I also feel like in a staff writer, that's kind of like your pick, your mentee, the person that you get to bring in and sort of it's like you won the lotto. You do. And so you really want someone that you like. And I'm really fortunate that even though I inherited everyone at such a great staff, that especially that staff writer position, it's like I won the lotto.
Wow, that's good.
I'll throw it out there because I recognize this is probably one of the more interesting questions of people on, watching this. What do showrunners like? What do showrunners want?
They're writing it down. That's right.
Right, exactly. I was trying to think. A lot of. I wholeheartedly agree with everything Monica said. Because she's talking from the point of view of what is useful for you in that room when you hit a wall. Someone who can throw out pitches and hear no and keep throwing them out. Amazing. That's such an asset to have. I was trying to break it down into what I look for when I'm looking for a new writer and what I look for when I'm looking for when a seasoned writer, because oftentimes I'm looking for upper level writers as well. For a new writer, I'll use a sports analogy, if you're sports fans, when you hear people talking about kids who are getting drafted, into the pros, whatever, you talk about their projectability, meaning they don't expect them to be able to come and be stars right now, but they're looking at things that project to the future, their skill set, their speed, their strength, their hand-eye coordination. Same thing for writers. I look for base talent that's projectable that will develop into something else. And for me specifically, because I'm usually hiring comedy writers almost exclusively, I'm looking for a grasp of irony. Irony is one of those things that we all think we know what it is. And me saying that is even ironic. But it's something that we all know it when we see it, but being able to craft a joke specifically where you are setting someone up with something that they recognize and then giving them an ironic twist is a skill set, and me recognizing that in somebody. Sometimes I may read a whole spec script and it's just like one section or one scene that had a good piece of irony in it that is enough for me, to say, okay, this is something I can work with, and then knowing it's my responsibility to help that person mature as a writer along the way. For older writer, to stay in the sports analogy world, I look for someone who's had to change positions in their career, who, started off as one thing and then had to pivot and show that they're versatile, but then was able to learn something else. I just look for people who have had some experiences and I usually get this from talking to them and meeting with them and interviewing, where they've been the youngest in the room before, they've been the star of the room before, they've been the bottom of the room before, and had to learn from all those things. Because that's kind of like that's the seasoned demeanor I need from like my number twos and my number threes. When a script is thrown out, I don't need someone that's going to be freaking out. I need someone that's just going to say, well, hey, this happened. So what are we going to do now? So it depends on what kind of level I'm looking for. And then the earlier, I can make a judgment on a staff writer based on a sample. I would never hire a number two or number three based on the sample. That has to be based on me meeting them and then me calling Monica, saying, hey, you work with such and such, what are their agent? What's their agent not telling me? That kind of thing.
You should steal that. You should steal that Josh guy from her. He sounds pretty
seriously.
good.
I know, right? I know. So it's weird. It's weird you mentioned that because when she first mentioned Josh, I hated him. Who's this young guy coming out the box? Impressive. Then when I heard her talk, I guess I can use him too. Yeah.
That's great. How about you, Sheryl?
I think what I probably am most interested in, particularly at the staff writer level, I love somebody who's got a great grasp of structure, but I can teach structure. Mm-hmm. What I'm really looking for are memorable characters with memorable dialogue. When I'm staffing and I'm reading, I separate into the yes, maybe, and no pile, and I wait 24 hours. And then I go back to the yes pile and I go through one by one and I just look at the title page and I'm like, what was this one? Because now, they're all original pilots. I look at the title and I think, what was this one? And what did I like most? And if I don't know right away, it moves into the maybe pile. But, and I think this is what Saladin's talking about, that one moment or that one character or that one sequence that just kind of rose up off the page for a moment, keeps you in the yes pile.
It's good.
I want to be in. We all hope and dream to be in Sheryl's yes pile. That's a pretty prestigious pile to be in. What about you, Brian?
Better than an S pile.
Yeah, we don't want to be in Sheryl's S
pile. You know what? Great. Great instruction right now. This is fantastic stuff for everybody. Everybody's got a pretty serviceable script. And sometimes they all do blend together because they're pretty good. They're competent. A lot of scripts will come through that are fairly competent. And so you almost have to, at least I feel this way, somebody's got to come in and own it. They got to just come in and take the job for me. And part of that is, yes, memorable characters, a great moment in a script where you go, okay, that's really smart, what they just did right there. A great twist, a great turn, a great joke. But ultimately, I want somebody to come in and just take the job from me. And usually the way that happens is if they're about something. Like personally, I want people that are about something. That the business is not all they care about, right? That they have a broader worldview and there's other stuff that they care about. Those are the kind of people that I feel have a deep well to draw on, because you need deep wells to draw on when you're writing and writing on somebody else's show. I also like people that have the ability to recover from failure. That's when you're in the shark tank of a writer's room, where all the little sharks are trying to eat each other, and especially in the comedy side of things. I mean, it's just, man, it's really competitive. And unless the showrunner is fostering a sense of family where there's not where there's not a sense of, dog eat dog in the room, but the showrunner is trying to create chemistry so everybody feels like they're a member and they're participating. Sometimes somebody's recovery ability is even better than the joke they pitch or the line that they pitch. If you pitch a line and it's the great howling wilderness and nobody responds, you better have a good comeback. You better have a good way to recover. One time I just, I pitched something that was such a big whiff in the room. And I just said, you know what? If I ever pitch anything like that again, I'm going to kick my own butt. Right. And I got a better laugh out of my recovery than I did out of the pitch. And I earned the right to be there because, that's part of it. You have to be fearless. It's a job where you have to be fearless. And if you meet with a potential writer for your show and you love their script, but you can't get them out of their shell, they're going to have a tough time in a writing room. They might be a brilliant writer, but part of being on a staff of a show is that it's a performance job too. You have to learn how to sort of put on the dog and pony show. And that's hard for some people. It can be a learned, it can be a new muscle that you learn how to use. If you're lucky enough for somebody to be patient with you long enough to keep you in the room. But people that have a fearless, failure's not an option attitude. One of my writer's assistants is a guy named Greg Garcia, who has created many shows. He's had a much bigger career than me. But one time I was at Warner Brothers, I was working late at night on a script, and then I was leaving, and he was still there when I left, and he was washing our dishes. And he was singing "Hooray for Hollywood" while he was washing our dishes. And he didn't know I was there. He didn't know I heard him. I said, that guy's going places. That guy's going to get a job. And now, he's creating shows left and right these days.
But was he singing it ironically?
He kind of joyfully, actually. It was like, I love my life, right? I love my life. Even though I'm cleaning somebody else's dishes, I love my life. That's the kind of heart you need to survive the business, because there's a lot of disappointment and there's highs and lows, and you got to find a way to stay in the roller coaster car and not leave. And
I think now you're getting into the things that we're looking for when we meet the writer after we've been impressed by the script.
Absolutely.
Because I'm with you. I'm always looking for joy.
Yeah.
I want joy in the process every step of the way. So I want people who aren't necessarily singing while they do the dishes, but are bringing joy to the table. Because my motto is, we work too hard not to have a good time. So if we can't have fun in the face of a looming deadline or a tough round of notes from the company or whatever, it just makes everything more difficult. So I appreciate what you're talking about in terms of, it's that spark when somebody sits down across from you. And it's not just can I stand looking across the table at you for 12 hours a day? It's, I want to know you better. Not just, I want to know where your pilot came from. but the way you carry yourself, the way you present yourself, the things that you're eager to talk about. I want to get to know you better. So let's get to know each other better while we're making a great show.
Absolutely.
Because you're in the room for 8 to 10 hours, 12 hours a day, right? And no one wants to be in a room with a joyless, high man. So much of the job is being likable, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was on a panel last summer with a showrunner who said, frankly, I can rewrite your script, but I can't rewrite your expletive deleted personality. And I thought, yep, that's it. That's the litmus test.
That's great. I wonder if you guys, I wanted to kind of jump into this question, if I could. You have all had these different journeys where you've worked on different shows and been a part. Now that you are you're in charge. You're in charge of a show. Looking back, you don't have to use names. I don't want you to use names. But did you experience a leadership failure in your journey that you go, I will never do that? And I experienced it, I lived it, I walked it, and I am determined to never do that.
Let me think. It's not that it's hard to come up with a failure. I'm just trying to figure out which one is the most beneficial to talk about. So on the two things, like, one is a practical one that I'll just share because it's part of the craft and the thing we have to deal with the showrunners. I went into production on The Last OG. We had done all our writing, and I didn't police the length of the drafts. And that sounds like a very simple thing, but that has a domino effect that really affects every facet of your production. And it's one of those things that's a trade-off, because in the story, in the writing phase, when you're a showrunner, you're fighting for length. You actually want to turn in things that are longer, because you want to give the executives, you want to over-explain things, all that kind of stuff. And then you find yourself getting attached to it. And I didn't police the length going into production. That just meant more headache for me, both, trying to make my days in terms of, literally being able to shoot the stuff that was in the schedule, but then also in editing. So that's one thing that I would just, share as a practical failure. That is something that, just one of the tools that you will have to develop as a showrunner, being able to keep track of those things as you progress through the different phases of an episode and of a season, both, writing, then to production and editing. But then going a little deeper than that, recently was in a position where, was on the show where I was a showrunner, but the show really revolved around the star. It was semi-autobiographical, and he was a very opinionated star, and very talented star as well. And a lot of the stories that we'd be breaking would be based on personal experiences. So a lot of the time in the room was spent listening to their stories. And then we had to execute those stories. And I found myself, partly because, I am definitely a proponent of the yes and approach to story breaking, because, Lord knows that having too many negative people in the room, certainly isn't conducive to producing television. But sometimes I compensate for that. And then sometimes, if I'm honest, my own insecurities and desire to be liked also kick in, to where I found myself not being critical enough of the stories that we were breaking, and not being critical enough of the structure, and not being critical enough of what we were trying to execute, because I was being very delicate about the fact that this was a person's, autobiographical, personal source of stories. But that was to the detriment of the show. And it was actually to the detriment of my relationship with him, because, in these odd things, we work in this industry with a lot of interesting people. Some people vibe off of the people that are going to tell them no. Some people really are driven by the fact that there are people that are criticizing them, and I'm not saying that's a good thing, but because I was working for a person like that, I found myself being relegated to well, Saladin's not really telling me what he really feels because he doesn't want to hurt me, or he's being too positive. Let me listen more to someone who's going to, in my opinion, be too negative. But still, it was a negativity that drove this person's the star's creative engine. And so the mistake I made was being too worried about being liked and being too worried about not offending. When I say not offending, I don't mean in the moral way. I mean not offending in terms of not saying something people don't want to hear. And that was to my own detriment.
And is that, would you say, more of your personality, right? Like you were truly trying to, in a sense, serve his story, right? But what you're saying is it ended up being counterproductive overall.
Exactly. And I knew enough now to recognize when just because it's my personality doesn't mean that I have to kind of lean on it, because it can become a little bit of a crutch, and that's why I'm quick to also identify the fact that because it's my personality, it also had to do with me and my desire to please, and sometimes that's a liability as well.
Yeah. Monica, how about you? Either you yourself a leadership decision, or maybe you experienced some sort of negative leadership experience that you tried to have a takeaway from.
Sure. I'll do the latter. So I was on a show, and it's like one of the shows that I had the most fun writing, but the room was very challenging. And it's the showrunner, and I really enjoyed working with the showrunner overall, created, and at first it was unspoken, and then it was very much out in the open, that there were A team writers and there were B team writers. And the level of anxiety that it created, because even if you had turned in a good script, 6 months earlier, you were always on the cusp of falling into B team. And it created a dynamic in the room. It created this like competitive nature that when I started on the show, it wasn't like that. And it made me so anxious all of the time. I knew in the room I was A team because I was a pitch machine, but on the page, the stories changed so much. The showrunner would also do this thing where they would pull certain people out of the main room into this, we would call it like the mini room with the showrunner, and re-break your story while you were in the main room, supposedly breaking what your episode was going to be. So there was a lot of confusion. It got really competitive. And I was like, I don't ever want to work on a show like that. As much as I loved the show and I loved writing the show, I don't want people to feel like they're A team this week and then they're B team this week. How are you going to give your best work? How are you going to pitch out? Just like, say that crazy pitch that might lead to the big idea if people are terrified of their standing. So yeah, I like to create, a loving, a family atmosphere. I said it on Queen Sugar when I started. I said, look, best case scenario, we're going to be a family. Worst case scenario, we're going to be a great team. Those are the only two options. I don't like feeling like I'm competing with the person next to me. I don't like that. I called, what was it like? There was a Piggy. As long as you weren't Piggy, like from Lord of the Flies, as long as you weren't Piggy, you were safe. If someone else's draft came in and it was worse, you were safe. And I was like, that's a terrible. I don't want to create that dynamic.
So it's either A team or Piggy. That's the option.
There's A team, B team, and then there's Piggy.
And then there's Piggy.
As long as you're not Piggy, you're okay. It was just the social dynamic was odd.
At the end of this roundtable, I will announce who is the A team, who's the B team, and who's the Piggy of this group. So stand by, everyone, for that. Thank you, Monica. Brian, the same question to you. Either a leadership choice you made or a leadership choice that you experienced that's this is a takeaway for me. I'm never going to do that.
It's a great question. Leadership choice that somebody else made that we had to suffer from. This is an ego-driven business, right? And sometimes people can get ahead of themselves, or see themselves as maybe more important than they actually are in the universe. And I had a showrunner who decided not to take notes from the network because she said they're stupid notes and I'm just not doing it. and it was a hit show. And the blowback was hard because we literally had to re-break a show in about 24 hours, start from scratch, because there was a big spanking that took place from the network. You're never too big for the network. He who has the gold makes the rules. That's the Hollywood golden rule. And, it's TV especially. I think the whole business is this way, but, features may be slightly different because I've done a few of those as well. And it's a consensus building business. It's built on consensus. That doesn't mean that you don't have to have a strong voice, that you shouldn't have strong opinions, and make sure that you're standing on principle on the things that are really worth standing on principle for. But those are rare. Standing on principle is the rarest thing. It's the exception rather than the rule. And I learned from that lesson, you don't ever refuse notes from the people that hold the purse strings on the show. It's just not worth it, because then everybody gets punished for that. The entire team gets punished for the ego of, one person. So I always tell everybody, that, look, this is, like Monica said, this is family. It might get a little dysfunctional from time to time. That's okay. We're human beings. We're all flawed. We might make mistakes. Everybody gets do-overs. No mistakes are fatal unless they're, giant moral failures or something. But, or they hurt somebody else on the show. Those could be fatal. But I truly believe in consensus building. A network note, a lot of times they are stupid. We have all gotten the stupid notes from the network but they have a gut instinct about something. They just don't know. They don't know the fix, right? And sometimes they'll pitch a fix that is a lot stupider than the note. But you still have to listen to those gut instincts. And I always have the rule of two. If one person gives me a note, it's subjective. Everybody has a butt, everybody has an opinion. But if I hear the exact same note from two people, I pay a lot more attention. Mm-hmm. And notes are important, especially from people who have earned the right to give you a note. You get to give notes if you're controlling the purse strings on a show, if you're the exec on a show, if you're the network head, executive. If you've earned the right to give an opinion, then people need to listen to those notes. So anyway, that was the lesson that I learned, and I preach consensus in a big way to people that work with me.
That's great. Sheryl, leadership for you.
My goal in the room and on the set, but particularly this conversation is focused on the rooms, is that everyone feel safe, heard, and respected. Because I have spent a lot of times in rooms where I did not feel those things. And it became very important to me to be able to provide a room where people could feel those things, because my prayer is it gives them the comfort, the freedom, and the encouragement to write with their whole heart, and contribute to other people's scripts with that same whole heart. I have worked with some fascinating people. I'd like to be a bigger person and say, at least I'll thank them for that. But what I will thank them for are the lessons I learned that I've been able to apply positively. So I'm like Monica, I want my room to be a family. I have another friend who said her staff called her the show mother rather than the showrunner. And I was like, yes, that's it. That's the job.
Love that.
I'm here to take care of everybody, make sure everybody gets their homework done on time, that they look really good when our friends from the network come by, and that when they are up on stage at the school play, everybody's doing their best. So it took a while to get there, and some scars and some therapy to be able to process it all. But yeah, I have my list of things I will never do as a result. And it keeps me focused on being positive, welcoming, supportive, and loving.
Let's talk identity and representation. We have I'm looking at a group of people here that represent people of faith, people of color, men and women. Our business, our industry has had a lot of comeuppance over the past couple of years with some of this, many things in our culture. I want to frame this conversation in a faith framework. As people of faith, I oftentimes personally get very frustrated that the church with a big C isn't leading these conversations. We're not leading the change. Oftentimes, we're the ones being dragged behind. And one of the things that we talk about at Act One, and we're constantly trying to reinforce, is I want us to lead in these conversations in the culture of respecting people, treating them with dignity and respect. This idea that all voices are welcome, at the table. I want to know from you guys, your experience. What can we do better in this as people of faith? How can we contribute to being better at making sure people have a seat at the table, making sure that people are treated with dignity and with respect? And I'll start with Monica.
Yeah, it's kind of like the big topic right now. And I'm really excited that CBS has wanted us to lean into, we had an episode that aired, it was about the pandemic. And they asked us after we pitched it to them, are you gonna, hey, you haven't mentioned anything about Black Lives Matters. And I almost fell off my chair on the Zoom. I was like, what, do you want us to tell a story? I will, I ran Queen Sugar. I will go there, but this is CBS. And so CBS to me is sort of like, in terms of network, it's like the old guard. It's like the standard bearer. And so they were like, yeah, we really, whatever you want to say. And we had already broken the story, and it was at the very beginning of the pandemic. So it was in March. So that hadn't really happened yet. But I was actually surprised, impressed, relieved, happy that they were encouraging us to lean into this sort of cultural inflection point that we're living in right now. For me, how do we make it better? How do we do it better? I know for the longest time, I was, oftentimes the only woman in the room, because I started my career mostly in action, high concept, genre, and then almost always the only person of color. And as the staff writer or story editor, you don't really have a lot of power and authority. And so it puts you in this weird position of being the race police, where you're like, on Lost, when Damon was like, we're going to kill someone off the island, the conversation in the room quickly turned to Daniel Day Kim. We're killing Jin off the island. Why? Because he doesn't speak English, which was like a horrifying thought. I was like, what?
Wow.
Did you just say that out loud in the writer's room? And then it became myself and Javier Greer Marks Watch, who's Latinx, we can't kill Jin off the island because he doesn't speak English. It was an international flight coming from Australia. And then Javi pulled me aside and he was like, hey, you can't say that that's racist. You're a staff writer. He's like, you will get labeled the race police. He was like, you approach it from a story point of view. And so I went home and thought about it. And I was like, Jin is the only half of a married couple on this island. If we kill him off, we can't play love triangle. We can't play, oh, why are you looking at my wife that way? And then Javi would say, like, we can't do that. That's saying that you want to kill the only person off the island who doesn't speak English is racist, because he was supervising producer. Yeah. And so I say that to say that in staffing the shows, in putting together the list, everyone's always like, yeah, let's get a diverse staff writer. And I feel like the search needs to come also at the upper levels, the number 2s, the number 3s, the co-producer and up, trying to get diversity at that level, because they're the ones, that we look to, like, hey, can you rewrite this draft? I need you to help me re-break this. They have more power and authority because, like Brian said, we're in the Army, and because of their title. So I think it's a two-prong effect. And like right now, I think it's starting to shift, but Hollywood has been obsessed with the programs, which I came through a program too. So I'm not trying to hate on the programs, because they do give you a foot in, but it's like a triangle. And it's like the majority of the diverse writers that people are trying to pull in are at the bottom, when there's a lot of mid-level writers that are trying to make it to supervising or co-EP or EP that can't catch a break. So it's like a two-pronged thing.
And how much, and that's really a great answer to that question, because even what Saladin was saying earlier about staffing, he's picking 2s and 3s in the room with seasoned people that he has relationship with. He's seen what they've written. He knows. And so if you only run with people who look like you, talk like you, act like you, then that room is going to look more and more like you. Right. And so how do you break that? Because if what we're saying is there needs to be more voices of not just that, the token one person. How do you break that if the people in the circle that you run with tends to be only you, like you?
You have to be brave enough to hire outside your circle. And you have to consciously expand your circle. First season of Sweet Magnolias, the Netflix actually encouraged me to have an all-female room. And I said, I love that, but there's this one guy that I cannot do this show without. And this from somebody who used to be, like Monica, the one girl in the room. Yeah. Or my agent would say, oh, she's lovely, but we have our girl. So I actually told a rep, finally, I was like, stop pitching me men. I have my guy. But the women that I wanted initially, that I thought of bringing into the room, were all busy. So I had to, start with reading and then meet. And I knew I was going to have a diverse cast. So I knew I needed a diverse room, but it wasn't just a racial question. I was looking for people from small towns, because I'm not from one. And I wanted people of different ages, because we're a multi-generational show. And the mix that we got was fabulous. And I got a terrific education. And it wasn't just about me as a white woman saying, excuse me, what about this? And the Black women in the room going, oh, no, what about this? But very memorably, one afternoon, I said something that I thought was sort of a universal, and two of the writers in the room were like, not in a small town, not this character. And I said, okay, I had no idea. Tell me, explain to me the thought process. And we got this fabulous story out of it, a story that, a room full of me wouldn't have come up with, because I'm a white person who grew up on military bases and in the suburbs. So what I have started doing is I'm doing Start With 8 Hollywood, which is a mentoring group that started from Women of Color United and Bitch Pack and a couple of other groups. I'm just trying to meet more people at every level outside my group.
Yeah.
So that when I have I'm developing a show at Sony that is also going to be incredibly diverse. And I'm already thinking about, I need to know different people than I already know so that I have a great pool to draw on should that show happen. I need to be educated so that I can make educated choices when the moment comes.
Oh, Saladin, Brian, when it comes to identity, what about people of faith? Like, I get the intentionality and I support, and like I said, we need to do better at this. We need to do better at this. But I also ask, if we want to be intentional about hiring quote unquote minorities, what about people of faith? Is there an intention? Do you guys have an intentionality at all towards hiring other Christians to be in the room? Is that even I don't know, right? Is that even a thought? Do you guys think about it? Is it a consideration? Is it something that you're intentional about at all?
Yeah, I certainly am. And and I don't know where showing a preference towards Christians falls legally, but
nowhere these days.
Right. I mean, look, 100%. It certainly is something that I see as an asset. But I treat it like you would treat anything else, in terms of something else I may have in common with someone, or something else I may understand or share with someone in terms of a point of view. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't want a staff of all Christians. I've been in enough church groups to know that, because that's not necessarily conducive to accomplishing a goal either. Because it's still, just because we love Jesus doesn't mean we're going to, all see these things the same way.
That's right. That's right.
But I mean, the more honest answer, is also things that I create tend to come from me and my experiences, which tend to come from my world point of view, which is heavily influenced by being a Christian. So me seeing someone else who is a Christian also means that they are particularly positioned to probably be able to channel that point of view. So I can actually, legitimately say that can be an asset. But it's an interesting thing, because of course, Hollywood is almost synonymous with secularity, and with being anti-God in certain ways. And so there's certainly a need for more Christian representation, like all the members, of these various groups that we're all members of. And then, the people here, Christian representation that are Christians, that are good writers, good actors, good whatever you are. I think that start being good. And then that defies any stereotype or box that people try to put Christians in terms of why they don't want to hire Christians, or why they don't think Christians and Hollywood mix, And, God knows what he's doing, and God will raise to the forefront people who are in positions of power who will glorify his name. And that will then also draw all men, unto him in the way that he does best. And so it is a part of a process. But yeah, I do think there's a discussion to be had about us as Christians also deserving a place at the table, and how we can help facilitate that, for each other and with each other.
Well, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but I kind of am. Yeah. But also to Sheryl and to Brian, just be quiet. But to Sheryl and to Monica too. my greater point about identity,
Mhm.
right? Like when you walk into a room, you're a Black man.
Right,
That's what people
right.
see. When Sheryl
Mhm.
walks into a room, she's a white woman, right? The
Mhm.
identity. But how you identify yourself as people get to know you, right?
Mhm.
As a person of faith,
Mhm.
is that something that has been at times a struggle? Has it been something that maybe you've had to shelve? And are there, what I'm curious about
Mhm.
is there's this, there seems to be sometimes a tension
Right.
between people who think that Christians should be, screaming on the rooftops, right? And then there's people who think, no, you should be more covert and
Right.
dare I say, in the closet, right?
Mhm.
And I don't think either of those approaches
Right.
are either necessary or good.
Mhm.
Is there a happy medium? And I'm looking at you four who have reached a level of success going, how did you reach it? Did you reach it by being one of those poles or something in the middle? And how do you choose to be a leader, on your shows, living out your faith?
Right. You can go, Brian.
Thank you. I guess because I go back the farthest of all of us, I think. When I first sort of broke through and had my first staff job, I sort of had this attitude personally of a little bit self-righteous, I think. And I sort of had to learn some lessons about that. Hey, I'm going to be here. I'm going to help clean these people up. I never said that out loud, but sort of what was in my heart. And I got a deep soul impression one night when some of the staff people, wanted to go out and get drinks after show night. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to hang with you. I'm not going to go, have drinks with you. And I was trying to sort of hold on to my faith there. And I got a deep soul impression right in that moment. And this was what I heard. Who do you think you are? Me? And your job is to love on people. Your job is to be a blessing in any way you can. Be an authentic friend maker. If you love on people, I'll take care of the rest. And I really have tried to live that for the last 30 years, in my work. And it's such a, competitive business. It's honestly, a temporary business. We're all like gypsies wandering around looking for food most of the time. And you camp where there's food for a while. And then when the food runs out, you got to go somewhere else and find more food, right? That's just kind of the way the business is. We all just roll like that. And people need friendship. People need authentic friends. And by trying to live that out, by trying to be friendly to people, and actually be interested, not just in what they can do for you professionally, but how they're rolling personally, it makes a big difference. They want to be around people like, we all do. We want to be around people that care about us, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I do. Now, we do have to sort of be somewhat covert, and it kind of comes and goes with the whatever the politics of the day are. And right now, there's more of a reason to be a little more like Dietrich Bonhoeffer behind enemy lines, I guess. I don't know. But I'm not planting any bombs to hurt people. I'm just whatever bombs I plant are going to be bombs of love, and caring. And I just think as people of faith, that's how we're supposed to live. We're supposed to love on people unconditionally, even if they reject everything we believe. And if I'm hiring somebody, now I have hired actually out of the Act One program. I've hired graduates from Mac 1 to work on projects for us.
Thank you, Brian. Good job.
Yes, I do believe in that process. But if I have a brain tumor, I would hire a raging nihilist who's the best brain surgeon in the world. And if they happen to be a Christian, that would just be a bonus. I want the best person that knows how to take the brain tumor out. Doesn't matter how they roll personally. So, to me, when we're staffing up a show or, hiring a crew or whatever, to be honest, it's kind of a mission field anyway. So to me, I just want to hire the best people that are available, and the ones that I'm pleasantly surprised might have the same faith as me. That's just a bonus. That's just a blessing. That doesn't, I don't consciously set out to try to stack the deck like that, because we do need everybody's perspective. No matter where we come from, we need to hear from everybody.
Yeah, that's good. Someone else?
I'll just share, and I think part of your question, Jimmy, was, have we, in terms of our own identity, how we represent that when we go about, in terms of what we're going to be known as and how it affects our career. I'll just share from my own personal experience. I do not think being known as a Christian has hurt me in the industry at all, and in fact, I'm pretty sure it has helped in all the ways that it is supposed to help. Now, I appreciate the two examples that you gave, Jimmy, because I think not just Christians in the industry, but Christians, period. I think we wrestle with that. How much are we supposed to, go ye therefore and teach and, make disciples of the nations? Are we supposed to be in your face? Are we supposed to be more, covert, is the word I know that we're using. And as you said, neither of those is right or wrong. It probably depends on your personality and how God has spiritually gifted you in terms of, how you manifest those gifts. But for me, since like I saved at an early age, I was 11, so I was going through the most horrible period of most people's lives when I got saved, which is adolescence. So, I learned early on to just deal with the ramifications of being different. And those were some very painful lessons that I'm just now being able to tap into creatively. But because of that, I think my approach professionally has been never, putting my light under a bushel, if I can try to quote scripture. But at the same time, I don't, you should ask people I work with. I don't think I've ever come in, like trying to wear Christianity, on my sleeve or badgering people. People may have received it like that before. I just know I made a commitment to myself never to purposely avoid people learning that I'm a Christian, or never to hide it, basically. And I can point to, just to give examples of how I don't think it's ever hurt me. Before I was on Frasier, the showrunner on Frasier called me up at home and said, "Hey, look, I hear you're a Christian. Will you be comfortable working on our show in our room?" And I took that as a sign of respect. I really did. He wasn't saying they were going to, he wasn't saying they were going to change. In fact, he would say, "Are you going to be okay with us being the way that we want to be?" Sure. So right. I'm not fooling myself, but at the same time, it made me proud to hear that people were saying I was a Christian, And so I don't think it has hurt. And that has happened on more than one show. I've had that happen. Executives call me and things like that. And so, I think it is something that has put me in position to then, and I've made plenty of mistakes. Sometimes I wish people did not know I was a Christian because of stuff I did and said. And I'm like, oh crap. All right, Lord, well, if this was the whole reason you had me here, I just messed that up. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I know I've been put in positions for God's light to shine in someone else's life because they were aware and they were paying attention to what I did with the knowledge of, he's a Christian. Let me see how he handles that, and hopefully even in the mistakes and even in the failures, hopefully God was still able to be glorified, but so I certainly don't think it is something that we as Christians should feel any sort of insecurity about letting it be known.
Yeah. Monica, what would be your advice for like someone trying to break in to the business in this? Do you, because we get this question a lot at Act One, right? Like, how do I live out my faith in this business? And for you, how are you able to kind of answer that question in your own kind of life?
For me, it's always been something that has come out in almost every room. And it's that question, like, what did you do this weekend? And it's like, I did this, and I went to church.
Mm-hmm.
And so people, they're always like, oh, and I do, Dean Batali, I think I saw his name on here.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of my mentors, said to me a long time ago, it's easier for you because you're African-American and
Yes.
there is an idea of what Black church is in our public consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen Black church on TV, we've seen the choir, and it is not foreign and it is not as, judgmental perhaps when people think about the Black church.
Yeah.
So it is a little easier for me, I think, to say, yeah, I went to church. What's up? You want to talk about the sermon? And it's always been that in rooms, and it's not something that I'm like quoting scripture right and left and saying things, but I do believe, that scripture, like your gift will make room for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought it meant like your gift is writing or whatever. And then one day it was like, your spiritual gifts. And I'm an encourager and I'm an intercessor. When I'm feeling really bold, I'll say I'm a prayer warrior, but today I'm feeling like I'm an intercessor. And so those are my gifts. My husband has the gift of evangelism. He's done a lot of youth ministry and things like that. That's not my gift. And so people when they get to know me, they get to know that my faith is very important to me. And that's very much part of who I am, just like being African-American and Korean-American is. And I look at the world through that lens. And so I say you have to be yourself, because no one wants you sitting in a room not being authentic, because we're trying to mine your life for story.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely helps, but I've never been, hit you over the head with it. And I will say this, the Lord's like, tell the whole truth. There was one room where I could tell my boss felt a very certain way about the church, Christianity, and everything. So I wasn't all like, hey, I went to church this weekend. One day I had to share my screen and I had to put my password in. And, my password is always something spiritual, like Jesus is Lord or something like that. And it was on the screen in bold, because it wasn't, how sometimes it's encrypted or sometimes you can see it. And it was almost like the Holy Spirit was like, well, they know now. Trying to keep it a secret. You were afraid. They know now. So don't ever do that again. It was like me shrinking away in fear from who I was. And it was like, I learned a lesson that day.
That's great.
Can I add something here, Jimmy?
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the comedy shows I was on, I won't name which one. I had a Harvest Crusade sticker on my car. And I was walking in to Warner Brothers from the parking lot with one of my colleagues on the show who happened to be a Jewish gentleman. And he goes, what is that? What's the Harvest Crusade? And I sort of had to do a bit of the curly shuffle at that point. And I said, well, it's like it's this thing down Angel Stadium, and Christians go and they sing and they have a good time together hanging out, and sometimes they'll invite their neighbors, who maybe don't go to church or whatever, to come and be part of that big party. He goes, so what, they're like being harvested, like harvesting organs? And I said, I don't even know how to answer that. And he goes, we Jews, we tend to get a little nervous when people are targeting us for anything. So it was a really interesting conversation. Yeah. But I do have to say, and I had to sort of find my way with some of those kind of weird Christian things, because to be honest, let's just be honest. Sometimes Christians wear their faith like a big weird hat, right? You're walking down the street, you got this big funky hat, it's kind of going going crazy, and other people are looking at you from across the street saying, look at that dude with the big weird hat on, right? And, Moses told the Israelites not to sacrifice in front of the Egyptians, right? Because the Egyptians would drain the blood first on their pagan rituals, they'd sacrifice the animals, but it would be very safe and clean. And, but for the Jews, it was the more blood, the better, right? And so Moses said, don't sacrifice in front of the Egyptians, for you will be an abomination to them. And I could be wrong, but I think a lot of Christians sort of become an abomination to the people around them because they just make messes and they wear the big weird hat. But so you have to find a way to integrate your faith in a way that doesn't, be an abomination to people too, or to put them off. And I think friendship is the thing, being authentic, not hiding your faith, but just being loving on people. And I really do think that's the key. And at the end of that show, that comedy show, we got canceled. They literally pulled the rug out from under us in the final season of the show. With 4 episodes to go, they said, we're just not going to finish. And it was like this bomb that dropped on everybody, on a day. And we were cleaning our offices up, the next day. And one of those Jewish guys on the team, on the writing crew, asked me if I would pray for everybody around the writer's table. Wow. Asked me, called me out, and asked me if I would pray for everybody. So, it's not because of me. It's not because I'm Mr. Big Shot or some great, virtuous Christian. It was because they trusted me.
Wow. At
the end of the day. So, but I did not ever have any more Harvest Crusade bumper stickers.
And also, the hat, your hat it fits pretty well now, Brian. So good job with that. Your weird,
Thank you.
Weird hat.
Thank you.
Sheryl, did you want to add anything? We're up against it on time, but
I'll make this brief. I have a really hard time talking for too long without working the fact that I'm a Lutheran into the conversation. Anyway, so I tend to say it up front, not as a, here comes the evangelism program, but as here's my identity, here's my point of view, because I have spent years working to integrate my faith and my art, so that I hope it's really hard to peel one from the other. But we were on set for season 1 of Sweet Magnolias and had some challenges. And my non-writing EP came up to me and said, I just want you to know that I really like the way you run a tight ship. And he knew my dad had been in the Navy, so he knew I would appreciate that. And he said, but here's the thing I really appreciate. I think we all benefit from your relationship with the big guy upstairs. And we stood there while there was a camera change, and we talked his faith point of view, my faith point of view, what it meant to us both to be in that moment with the show and in that moment with each other. And I told him, I said, I believe, and we had touched on this before, I said, the hand of God has been on us since the moment we met. And he now refers to it as the hand of providence, because that's where we got by the end of the discussion that night. And now things come up and he'll say, Sheryl and I know the hand of providence is on us. We'll figure it out. And that there have been a lot of beautiful moments that have come out of this series, but I think that might be my favorite.
That's beautiful.
That we could meet from different faiths in that moment to know that God had brought us to that moment, and that we were there to use the gifts he had given us to try and bring joy to other people.
I'm so grateful to all of you guys for being here. And before I pray, I just want to tell Monica, you might want to go home and change all your passwords now.
We figured him out.
But I'd love to close us in prayer. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for your light and your beauty and your truth and your goodness being reflected tonight in these four individuals. God, thank you for how they represent you in this industry. God, thank you for just who they are and how you have uniquely crafted and created each of them to stand where they stand today. I just want to pray a special blessing, God, on each of them, that you would fill them just with the power of your presence, that they would be even more aware of their surroundings, of who's around them, of the needs around them, so that they can be that friend, so that they can be that protector. They can be that one who makes sure that those that they work with experience your love. God, I pray that they would be the hands and the feet of your Spirit, and they'd be a tangible, physical representation of how you love us, how you love us. And God, we just thank you for this fantastic evening. Thank you for everyone who joined us. Pray a blessing upon all those who were a part tonight. And we pray this in Jesus' name, and on your promises we stand. Amen. Thanks for listening to the Act One podcast, celebrating over 20 years as the premier training program for Christians in Hollywood. Act One is a Christian community of entertainment industry professionals who train and equip storytellers to create works of truth, goodness, and beauty. To financially support the mission of Act One, or to learn more about our programs, visit us online at actoneprogram.com.